Dear aspirants, loss and damage is a very important topic from the perspective of our mains and prelim exams. So as we know that the climate change has become one of the most important global concern, and toward that developing country and LDCs are the most affected country, because these are the countries that actually lack the financial resources, technological capacity and expertise to actually mitigate and work toward the adaptation and mitigation. So that has been the issue. So as per the data, climate change induced loss and damage could cost developing country around 260 to 580 billion by 2030. Similarly, it could go toward 1 trillion to 1.8 trillion dollar by 2050. So it is a global concern, and especially for the developing country it is very important, because it is the case of survival of the developing country. So therefore need to be taken with a great care. So let's have an understanding about what is this loss and damage fund and why it is important, and what are some of the shortcomings of this fund. So global climate funds are important because we understand the developing countries are the sufferer of the climate change, and when it's come to taking the responsibility toward financing and building the technological capacity of the developing country, in many cases most of the developing countries are not taking proper and moral step toward that. So therefore there were a number of climate related agreements. We can talk about United Nations framework on climate change, so that is also a very important climate platform, and toward that it is important to actually address the climate related disaster and catastrophe. So incidents of climate related disaster and catastrophe has gone up. Issues like erratic monsoon, earthquake, cyclone, such incident has gone up. These incidents create pressure on the developing and LDC country, and because we understand a large number of people who are poor, and obviously they do not have capacity and sufficient resources to address and mitigate the climate related disaster, so they are in the vulnerable position. So toward that, this loss and damage fund could be a very important resource for mitigating and adaptation in context of developing country in their fight to climate change. So this loss and damage fund, so it is a financial mechanism designed to address the irreversible consequences of the climate change. Consequences can be in the form of heat wave, cyclone. Frequency of heat wave, cyclone has gone up. At the same time, across the world we are actually facing the issue of drought. It has also disturbed the Indian monsoon system, so we can see the erratic nature of monsoon in the Indian subcontinent. So we understand this in context of the South Asia, so it holds near around 70% of the world population, but the kind of resources that they are possessing is quite inadequate and not sufficient. So toward that, this loss and damage fund can be a good alternative to actually fulfill their resources and capacity toward climate change. So what are some of the important features of this loss and damage fund? So this loss and damage fund is credited with being historic breakthrough, and it was a part of COP27 of the United Nations Climate Summit that took place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So the idea behind this loss and damage fund to actually provide essential resources, financial resources to the developing countries, so that they could take effective and efficient measures toward the climate change. So when we talk about the little bit history behind this loss and damage fund, so this can be traced back from the Paris Climate Agreement that took place in the year 2021. So actually it laid the foundation for the loss and damage fund, but actually it didn't make it quite obligatory on the developed country to make contribution toward this fund. So it was made quite voluntarily, but it didn't work in a proper way. India's Union Minister for Environment and Forest and Climate Change has expressed that India will seek fund from the facility considering its extremely vulnerable to the climate change. So being developing country, India has also responsibility to uplift the large number of the poor people, and for that it is important to have industrialization, and that will actually create economic opportunity and will increase the per capita income in India, and therefore it is important to actually have enough and sufficient financial resources to actually address the issue of climate related disaster. So therefore India has number of a time has actually talked about kind of a fund so that developing country could actually take effective and efficient measure toward the climate change. So this loss in damage fund is estimated to be nearly 500 billion and rising by 200 billion annually, because it is insufficient when it's come to needs of the developing and the LDC country. It requires huge amount of fund so that the issue related to the climate change could be tackled in a more comprehensive and effective way. Let's understand some of the other aspects of this loss and damage fund. So when it's come to the implication of the loss and damage fund, so let's have understanding what could be the implication of this fund. So first we have to understand it could lead into the diplomatic repercussion, because we understand to combat the escalating consequences of the climate change, vulnerable communities, and signifies a breakdown in their diplomatic efforts, leading to doubt about nations' ability to collaborate and effective work toward addressing the climate related consequences, because nowadays we are having the divide in between the developed and the developing world on the many global concerning issues. So one of being the climate change. So we understand that when we talk about the climate justice is a very important principle, because there is a very important principle in context of the climate negotiation that is called common but differentiated responsibility, or you can say historical obligation. So we understand that most of the developing countries are responsible of the today's climate related disasters and the consequences, because their level of industrialization has took place in a very last 100 years. The kind of lifestyle that the developing countries are actually having is based on a high use of energy and also the exploitation of the resources. So it should be their responsibility to contribute more toward the efforts and the measure toward the climate change. But many a time the developed country or you can say the wealthy country are not quite taking their measures quite proactively, and they have, for example, United States of America has came out from the United Nations framework for the climate change, but lately it has joined, but it has not done any significant thing in the area of the climate change. Similarly, this is the story of almost all the developing countries. They are not taking a very positive and effective step when it's come to building the capacity of the developing and LDC country, so that they could take effective measures in the area of adaptation and the mitigation. So that has also been one of the issue, and the debate is based on the climate justice, but there is no justice in that regard. So therefore we have lack of trust, the unwillingness of the wealthy nations to fulfill intended commitments, undermine the faith in global climate negotiation, and this hampers the cooperation spirit. That the cooperation is the need of the hour, because climate issue is such a herculean issue that cannot be tackled by one country or a group of countries, rather than it requires a committed global action. So these are some of the important actually institution and summit that talk about the climate related cooperation and coordination. So one of them is we understand that United Nations framework on climate change, private corporation, philanthropic organization. So these all work together in a very coordinated way toward the issue of climate change. So beside this, we have some other important aspects related to this loss and damage fund. So let's understand those important aspects. So in many cases, climate induced disasters like flash floods, cyclones, these are resulting into disaster and displacement of lakhs of people across the world. So we had a incident of California forest fire in the Greece, great bushfire in the Australia, flood in the Pakistan, and incident of flash floods that has gone up in the Indian Himalayan states. So these all are actually resulting into the displacement of large number of people, particularly the poor people, and that's therefore it is an important of great concern. So therefore we can understand this in the economic consequences of the climate related consequences. the financial crisis and the recession in the region can have far-reaching consequences due to the global economic leakages. Because I understand that global fund for tackling the climate change is important, but the kind of economic scenario that the world is having after the COVID-19 is actually has created a pressure on the almost all of the country in the world. Financially, there has been inflation, there is issue of slowdown, and there is no positive economic growth in many countries. So financially, they are not actually in a good position. So therefore, obligation and contribution to the loss and damage fund has been affected quite badly. And the story is same for the Global Green Climate Fund that has been actually conceived in the Paris Agreement. So there has not been any substantial progress in that also. The fund has not been actually, the 100 billion fund per year has not been actually deliberated till now. So it's still a matter of concern and the approach is not quite effective. So that has been also one of the factors because of which we are not seeing the functioning of loss and damage fund. So beside that, suffering of the vulnerable people. So we understand vulnerable people across the developing country and the LDCs are the most vulnerable people. Incidents like cyclone, flash floods, drought, heat waves has actually increased the vulnerability of the many community, and there has also been the issue of food insecurity because if you talk about in Indian subcontinent, large number of people directly engage in the agriculture activity, and food security is one of the most important aspect for the human being. So due to climate induced incident like heat waves and I would say the flash floods are actually affecting the food security too. So this also actually create pressure on the vulnerable community and it threatens the climate justice. So climate justice, as we have discussed, is an important principle when it comes to the climate related negotiation. At the same time, it also makes community quite more vulnerable in the developing country and LDCs. Why developing countries are more vulnerable? Because they do not have enough financial resources, be it financial resources, technological resources or expertise in that area. So therefore, populations are very vulnerable in the developing country. So this should be the matter of concern, but the kind of approach that we are actually seeing of the developed country is not quite positive when it's come to the developing the capacity of the developing countries. So it is also resulting into the humanitarian crisis. Withdrawal can also increase the number of humanitarian crises, including food shortage, displacement, conflict, forcing community to deal independently with the worsening of climate and its consequences. So we understand that climate-induced disasters and catastrophes are resulting into the great humanitarian crisis. So therefore, it should be taken with a great care. At the same time, we can also see the instability caused by the climate change that also have a security implications because we understand that the incidence of drought has gone up. So water war is also a probable situation in the present world order. In case of India, we can see large number of Indian states are having issue of drought. So water is one of the most important and essential resource for the food security and also for the drinking purposes. But nowadays, incident of drought has gone up, so that has actually also made the community quite more vulnerable. So it might also result into the instability. So one country can fight with another country on the issue of water. So that need to be taken into consideration. So one more fact, 80% of disaster-related displacement globally in the past decade occurred in the Asia and the Pacific. So see the vulnerability of this region when it's come to the climate-induced natural and catastrophic factors or incidents. Now the question comes to us that why we should make loss and damage fund as an essential part of the climate justice. So climate justice is important because if we talk about the kind of resources and the financial expertise, it's not distributed evenly, rather it is unevenly. It is largely concentrated in the developed world, particularly the Western country, United States of America, European countries. So these are the countries where they have the expertise in the climate-related adaptation, mitigation. They are also the leader in the technology and also have financial resources. So in that regard, as we understand, the climate issue is a world issue. So therefore, and these countries are also historically responsible toward the present state of the climate. So therefore it should be moral duty of these countries to contribute more and work very positively and proactively toward the building up capacity of the developing country, but this is not the case. Therefore this fund must be made part of climate justice. So therefore balancing adaptation and L&D. Adaptation and L&D are not mutually exclusive but coexist on continuum of climate resilience. Next, global climate action. Failure to meet those obligations can derail the climate action, adding pressure to the future convention of conference of party talks. Moral and financial responsibility that we have discussed just now. So because of all these reasons, we must actually bring the issue of climate justice when it's come to tackling the issue of climate change and building the capacity of the developing country and least developed countries. So this is all about our loss and damage fund. As we just discussed that the global climate change is one of the global issue that actually need global coordinated and collaborated partnership in the tackling of the climate change. So therefore developed country must come up with their historical responsibility and contribute quite effectively and positively and also at the same time proactively. So this is all about loss and damage fund. Hope you like the video. Thank you for watching this video and ऐसे ही such amazing content को जानने और समझने के लिए आप हमारा YouTube चैनल सिलेक्शन IAS को सब्सक्राइब करें एंड अपनी यूपीएससी प्रिपरेशन से रिलेटेड किसी भी तरह के डाउट को सुलझाने के लिए आप हमसे डिस्कस कर सकते हैं हमारे व्हाट्सएप 9625350287 एंड हमारी वेबसाइट www.selectionis.in के थ्रू।